I always thought I was a good husband. I wasn't perfect, of course, who is? But I believed I did enough to keep my marriage strong. I worked hard, provided for us, and always made sure the bills were paid. It didn't matter if that meant long hours or constant travel. It was all for her, for us. Or so I thought. My wife, Emma, had been patient with me for years. In the early days of our marriage, she would smile when I came home late, pulling me into a warm hug and telling me I was working too hard. She'd laugh at my stories from the office, listen as I vented about difficult clients, and remind me to take breaks when I pushed myself too far. But over time, things started to change. The smiles became less frequent. The hugs grew shorter. Our conversations turned into polite exchanges about groceries or bills, and the warmth I used to feel from her began to fade. I told myself it was just a rough patch. All couples go through phases, right? What I didn't realize was that while I was busy focusing on work, she had started to drift away. It wasn't just the little things that changed. It was her. She started going out more often, dressing up in a way she hadn't in years. She stopped asking about my day, stopped waiting up for me when I worked late. And then, there was her phone. Emma used to leave her phone lying around, forgotten on the kitchen counter or the nightstand. But now, it was always with her, the screen face down whenever she set it down. I tried to ignore it at first. I didn't want to seem paranoid, and besides, I trusted her. But the doubt started creeping in, slowly at first, until it became impossible to ignore. "Lodge hazard?" Olivia asked George. "Yes." The first crack appeared one Friday night. I came home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise her with takeout from her favorite restaurant. She was sitting in the living room, her phone in her hand, staring out the window. "Hey," I said, setting the bags down on the counter. "Got us something special tonight. Your favorite." She looked up, startled, and quickly set her phone down. "Oh, that's nice," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. As we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She barely touched her food. Her answers to my questions were short, and she seemed distracted, like she was a million miles away. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just tired," she said, avoiding my gaze. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. A few weeks later, I found the receipt. I wasn't looking for anything, but as I grabbed her coat from the back of a chair, a small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, curious, and froze when I saw what it was. A receipt from the Lotus Hotel, dated one of the nights I'd been away on a business trip. At first, I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she went there for coffee, or maybe it was from a work meeting. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the doubt gnawed at me. That evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I decided to confront her. "Hey, I found something interesting today," I said, holding up the receipt. "Were you at the Lotus Hotel recently?" She glanced at the paper, her expression carefully neutral. "Oh, yeah," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I had a meeting there. One of my clients prefers hotels for their meetings." "At a hotel? It's more professional," she said, her tone light. "You know how some people are." I wanted to believe her. Her explanation made sense, and I didn't have any real reason to doubt her, except for that nagging feeling in the back of my mind. As the weeks went by, that feeling only grew stronger. She started staying out later, always with a vague excuse about work or friends. She'd laugh at texts on her phone, but when I asked what was funny, she'd just say, "Oh, nothing, just something silly from a friend." I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. After all, I was busy too, working late nights, traveling for meetings. Maybe we were just going through a rough patch. But then there was the night I came home late and found her on the phone. I walked into the living room, dropping my bag by the door. She didn't hear me at first, too absorbed in her conversation. "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow," she said, her voice soft and warm. When she noticed me, she quickly hung up. "Who was that?" I asked, my chest tightening. "Just a friend," she said, standing up and heading for the kitchen. "What friend?" "You don't know her," she said, brushing past me. "She needed advice about something." I didn't press her. I wanted to believe her. But deep down, I knew. The confirmation came one afternoon when her phone buzzed while charging on the counter. I wasn't snooping, but the preview flashed across the screen before I could look away. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My heart sank. When she walked into the room, I confronted her. "Who's texting you?" I asked, holding up her phone. She froze, her eyes darting to the screen. "It's just a friend," she said, her voice tight. "A friend who can't wait to see you tonight." "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "Then tell me what it is," I said, my voice trembling. For a moment she said nothing. Then, finally, she sighed. "We've been talking," she admitted. "But it's nothing serious. Just someone to talk to." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. "Someone to talk to?" I repeated. "Why couldn't you talk to me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Because you're never here," she said. "And when you are, it's like you're not really there. You're always thinking about work, always on your phone or your laptop. I feel like I'm invisible." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Over the next few days, we talked, or tried to. She told me about the man she'd met, how he made her feel seen and appreciated. She swore nothing physical had happened, but the way she spoke about him made it clear how much he meant to her. "You don't understand," she said one night, her voice breaking. "He listens to me. He makes me feel alive." "And what am I?" I asked bitterly. "A paycheck? A stranger?" She didn't answer. A week later, I came home to find the house eerily quiet. On the kitchen table, there was a letter. For a lover. Like 7 years. "Years. I'm sorry," it began. "I never meant to hurt you, but I can't keep living this way. I've decided to leave. I hope one day you can forgive me." I stood there for what felt like hours, rereading the words until they blurred together. She was gone. It's been a year since that day. At first, I tried to bury myself in work, but no amount of success could fill the void she left behind. I kept replaying our last conversations in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently. But over time, I began to heal. I focused on myself, on rebuilding my life piece by piece. I found solace in friends, in hobbies I'd long forgotten, and in the realization that I couldn't change the past. I don't know where she is now, and I don't want to. All I know is that the man I was back then, the man who took her for granted, no longer exists. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that love isn't just about providing or protecting. It's about being present. For years, I believed our life was perfect, or at least close enough. My wife Julia and I had built something stable together, a good home, 2 wonderful sons, and what I thought was an unshakable bond. Our days were a steady rhythm of family dinners, soccer practices, and movie nights. Sure, I worked hard, and sometimes too much, but I was doing it all for us. Lately, though, Julia had been distant, quieter than usual. I told myself it was just stress or exhaustion. Everything shifted when Julia mentioned her company's weekend retreat. "It's a work thing," she explained. "You don't have to come if you're busy." Something about her tone made me pause. It wasn't that she was pushing me to stay home. No, it was more like she wasn't particularly eager for me to join her. Despite her casualness, I made the arrangements. On the morning of the retreat, we dropped our boys off at their grandparents' house, and by late afternoon, we were driving through rolling hills towards a secluded countryside lodge. The moment we arrived, I noticed a change in Julia. Her face brightened. Not at the sight of the picturesque grounds or the warmly lit main lodge, but when we encountered her colleagues. Among them was a man I'd never met before, Alexander, a younger, sharp-dressed new hire whose easy smile seemed tailored to charm everyone around him. Julia introduced him as part of her team. "He's been a huge help on the marketing campaign," she said, her voice light, her tone easy. I nodded politely, but my instincts flared. Dinner that evening was a lively affair. Colleagues laughed and toasted around the long wooden table in the dining hall. Julia and I sat side by side, but across from us sat Alexander. He was magnetic, the center of attention without trying too hard. His stories made the group laugh, and I couldn't help but notice how Julia leaned in when he spoke, her smile brighter than I'd seen in weeks. I wanted to dismiss it as my imagination, but when I stepped outside for air during a lull in the conversation, one of Julia's co-workers followed me. "Alexander and Julia seem to get along well, don't they?" she said, lighting a cigarette. I shrugged, feigning indifference. Then I felt, "Well," she added with a knowing look, "if I didn't know better, I'd say he's smitten. But hey, I could be wrong." She wandered off before I could respond. That night, as the guests filtered back to their rooms, Julia lingered in the lounge. "You go ahead," she said with a smile. "I want to catch up with some people." I hesitated but didn't push. As I walked towards our room, I glanced back to see her talking to Alexander, their heads bent close in quiet conversation. I didn't sleep well. At some point past midnight, I heard Julia stirring. Thinking she was going to the bathroom, I kept my eyes closed. But then I heard the soft click of the door as she left the room. I got up, my chest tightening as I followed her outside. She was on the far side of the courtyard, standing under a lantern's glow with Alexander. They weren't touching, but the intimacy in their stance was undeniable. "Couldn't sleep?" I called out, my voice breaking the quiet. They turned, startled. Alexander looked uncomfortable, muttering something about needing to head to bed, and quickly walked away. Julia stood frozen for a moment before turning to me, her expression unreadable. "I needed some air," she said simply. "We should talk," I replied. But she shook her head. "Not now." The rest of the weekend was strained. I stayed close to Julia, not wanting to let her out of my sight, and she seemed increasingly annoyed by my presence. When we returned home, I told myself to let it go. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the tension I'd felt was my imagination. Sometimes they went hand in hand. But then I found the messages. It was late one evening when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She was in the other room, and out of habit, I glanced at the screen. The preview read, "I miss you already." My heart sank. When Julia came back, I confronted her immediately. "Who's texting you?" I asked, holding up her phone. Her expression shifted, shock, then defiance, then guilt. "It's Alexander," she admitted, after a long pause. "Why is he saying he misses you?" "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "He's just been a good friend." "You friends?" I said, my voice rising. "Friends don't send texts like this, Julia." She looked down, tears pooling in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Over the next few hours, the truth unraveled. She told me how she and Alexander had grown close over the past few months, how he made her feel appreciated and seen. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. "But you've been so distant, so caught up in work. I felt invisible." Her words stung, but they didn't excuse what she'd done. "You could have talked to me," I said, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "I tried," she said, "but you weren't listening." That night, I slept on the couch. In the days that followed, we barely spoke. I felt like a stranger in my own home, watching as the woman I'd loved for years slipped further away. I thought about leaving, about packing my bags and walking out the door. But something held me back. We had 2 sons, we had years of memories. I couldn't just give up. Not yet. No. Julia cut contact with Alexander after that night. She promised to focus on rebuilding our relationship, to make things right. But trust isn't something that can be restored overnight. It's been a year since that weekend. We are still together, but our marriage isn't the same. Some days it feels like we're making progress, laughing at old jokes, sharing quiet moments like we used to. But other days, the weight of what happened feels unbearable. I don't know if we'll ever fully recover. What I do know is that love isn't just about the big gestures or the grand plans. It's about being present, about showing up every day, even when it's hard. And that's something I'm still learning how to do.